Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I wanted to talk a bit about the books that I've been reading this week. So let's get talking a little bit about them. And yeah, I hope everyone is having a good week. I'm currently with another dog who will probably appear at some point. He's somewhere down there. Will appear at some point as I talk. But let's get talking about what I've been reading. So first up, and as part of the International Booker Prize long list, the final book I've been reading from that list, we have Eurotrash by Kracht. Hello, and translated by Daniel Bowles. And this is a wild ride of a book, and it is quite literally a ride, as the characters in this book go on a journey through various things. And essentially, it starts with a man and his mother who go on some kind of quest together. And what starts off as a bit more of a generic journey, seemingly, starts taking on increasingly dark undertones. So his mother has recently left an institution for sort of mental ill health, and the son, who is also Kracht, is taking her on this journey. So the book starts to get this sort of meta fictional element because there is a Kracht in the book itself. And he is constantly compared to Daniel Kehlmann, a famous German writer who also blurbs the book. So there's quite a lot of things that happen in this book that feel kind of intertextual and kind of fun. But what happens is they go through this journey of his mother trying to spend her wealth. And so you get these ridiculous moments such as offering to pay 2,000, 3,000 Swiss francs for a taxi journey. And it just keeps on unraveling into this weird and wild journey. It's such an odd book in many ways, but really funny and really silly, but also deeply dark. We're kind of watching the final moments between a mother and son. And particularly as the mother loses a bit more grip with reality and her memories, and in the meantime brings up all this parts about European history and Nazis and various other things, and it just becomes this really complex web of a story. But it's also really deeply funny and touching and silly, and a lot that goes on. So I absolutely see why this made the Booker long list, International Booker long list, and I also see why a lot of people had it as one of their favourites, because I think this is a really bizarre but very uniquely framed book, and I really greatly enjoyed it. Next up, I read Nova Scotia House by Charlie Porter. And Charlie Porter, in terms of writing, is better known for writing about fashion and particularly a kind of history of fashion and what people wear. But Nova Scotia House is his first attempt at a novel, or at least fiction. And it's a really wonderfully bizarre book, but I absolutely adored this. I thought this was such a stunning piece of writing. In this book, it's told as a sort of stream of consciousness, or it's quite light on punctuation. So it has this really breathless quality to it. And I think that really adds to what's going on in the main thrust of this book, which is a lot about particularly HIV/AIDS and particularly love and loss and many other things. So we follow through the book as our main character is talking lovingly about a man who he knows he's perhaps soon to lose. And this man who is HIV positive is talking about his history and everything that's gone into a life well lived. But in doing so, it keeps on unraveling and peeling off all these little layers of something really quite gorgeous and heartfelt. It's so deeply affecting as a novel. At least I found it really moved me a great deal, because we sort of rocket through so much of his life, and particularly the vast difference between being a young person in the early 80s and around the HIV/AIDS crisis, and him now as an older man who is looking back over these memories. And this is something that is really, I always find incredibly touching about any narratives around HIV and AIDS, is just looking many years down the line, how people remember those times, and particularly how many people are still so scarred by everything they saw at the time. But at the same time, this book is this really beautiful testament to love. It's a set of characters, but particularly our main character, talking about the kinds of bonds that they have with people. And we're watching as this man who is dying is talking about, in a really unapologetic way, all of the people he's loved, all the people he's slept with, the nights he had out in bars and clubs, the ways he used to go around. And he is upset that he's ill, but he doesn't really regret the journey that maybe got him there. And it feels like a life well lived. And then there's this nod to the future about what it might look like to be with someone else, and to not worry about the person who's dying, but to worry about what comes next. But the way this book unravels, particularly with that really breathless style, this stream of consciousness, almost this punctuation light type of storytelling, it just means that you get this excitement and this flurry of energy that talks through when he is hooking up with someone or cruising or whatever else. And then the book goes through these absolute waves of grief and sadness. I just thought this was beautiful. I thought this was such a gorgeous piece of writing for just the... Sometimes my thinking around this is often that if a book is going to do stream of consciousness or have a winding sort of style like this kind of unraveling, punctuation-free style, it has to merit it. And I think this book absolutely does, because there's something about the breathless delivery that feels like someone confessing and also being terrified, and also someone caught up with the thrill of the chase during cruising, and just also losing their mind while they're trying to think about grief and how to process it. And all of that comes into this book, and I just think it is a triumph of writing. And I really deeply loved this. I found myself just wanting to return to the book and its sentences and just the gorgeousness of everything it was doing. Next up, I read Omar Akkad's book, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This. And this is a real polemic and beautifully argued non-fiction book that feels essentially like a long essay, but a call to action at the same time. And the book is particularly preoccupied with Israel and Gaza and Palestine, but it opens that up to a much broader conversation about art and politics and the role of how those two interact with each other. So, for example, he mentions a Canadian book prize where because of sponsorship of that book prize, many of the writers who had been shortlisted or nominated withdrew themselves from it, saying, I don't want to take money from a prize that is sponsored by this company. And he talks about the importance of making stands. But I think this is so poignant for the way that it looks at the ways that those things are often obfuscated in day-to-day discourse. So the ways that we so easily will switch to the passive voice when talking about certain disasters, as if somebody was killed by a spontaneous thing that nobody could have seen coming, or the ways that we talk about perhaps poverty as this horrible, sad thing, but not something that has been created or engineered or whatever else. And so the book really looks at these types of, essentially it's a bit of an exercise in language and the ways that so often we convince ourselves and add in things and consume media in certain ways. And so in some ways this book is an argument towards better media literacy around politics, but also specifically argues about, particularly with relation to Israel and Palestine, about how a lot of the discourse has been difficult for when people speak out, and what that often means, how that can look if, for example, somebody is terrified of speaking out, somebody is terrified about doing X, Y, Z. How does that play out for writers whose goal in theory should be to seek truth and to pursue arguments, to pursue ideas? What does that look like when art is treated as the safe thing? And that's what I found so utterly captivating about this book, is the way that it plays around with that idea and how it thinks about the role of the artist or of a leader or of whoever else to name a thing and to talk about it in those ways. So I found this a really affecting book, and particularly the writing style of this is incredible. I think on a sentence by sentence level, some of these lines are sort of straight to the heart, visceral, gutsy pieces of writing. I just thought this was phenomenal. And last but very much not least, Poor Artists, A Quest into the Art World by Gabrielle de la Puente and Zarima Mohammed. And this book sits in a really odd place between fiction and non-fiction. It's mostly fiction, but in some ways it reads as this non-fiction kind of discussion about art. And so I thought it was quite interesting next to Omar El Akkad's book in terms of how they speak to each other. So Poor Artists starts with this really bizarre and absurdist thing that made me chuckle. I thought this was so wonderfully silly, which is somebody describing their journey into being an artist and them describing that as being born an artist and being this little toddler walking around nursery saying, well, actually, I think the colours that we're using imply this sort of somatic approach that, these really highbrow artistic terms. And it's so absurd and so silly. But in the same vein, this book then develops this idea into something so captivating that I really loved it. It talks about the role of art. And this is sort of art in both a lowercase a and an uppercase a kind of way of art as this concept, art as this savior, but also art as this business and industry and many other things. So the book starts to delve into this discussion of what art can be, and it does so in a way of telling the story of this character. So this is where it feels like fiction but has a very non-fiction bent to it. And this is an artist who through creating art becomes disabled, or both in terms of sort of her body becomes frailer and frailer, but also at one point there's an incident where her hands are injured, and so as a result she's less able to make the art that she wants to. But the pulse of this book is just so vibrant and interesting in the way that it explores art as so much more than what I've ever seen it described as. So often in my experience, and I may not have read a great deal about it in this sense, we often talk about art in this way of expression and creativity and giving us meaning and giving us something to reflect off of, which this book absolutely acknowledges. But the book also talks about art as this real instinct of humans and something that comes from within, but particularly for people who call themselves artists, both lowercase and uppercase, that is such a drive that it overpowers everything else. And so at one point there's a discussion about, should an artist, is it difficult for an artist to be in a relationship with someone who's not an artist because they perhaps don't understand this drive that comes to create, that's far more than just, I want to make something because this is my job and I find it interesting, but is something bigger. It's a healing thing. It's a human necessity. But it also talks about the idea of how art is often used both as an industry and as a kind of creative process to try and patch up social ills. So it talks about, for example, often people who are given poor mental health resources will be given art projects as a thing to do, like an art workshop, to help them heal or recover, whilst also not acknowledging the wide gulf of things that is missing from their lives that would help them live a more consistent and happy life. So, for example, adequate housing or a stable income or whatever else. And so this book I just found so utterly fascinating, because you've got this silly kind of absurdist idea from the beginning of this baby talking in highbrow artistic terms, and then you've got something of a discussion about art being just so essential. And sometimes I can find books that talk about art in that way a bit off-putting, because it feels almost like it's talking about it in a way that feels as if it's treating it like it's the savior for all things. But I think what comes through really clearly in this book is this passion of art as a thing that should exist in and of itself, the outside of industry and outside of financial pressures, but as a form of something that is just essential, something that people need to do, that it bursts out of us and is who we are as humans, but in a way that isn't just that it's a simple nice, we like pretty things, but there's something about the way we do that that is restorative for us as well. I've rambled about this for quite a while. I think it's a phenomenal book, and it really took me by surprise because I didn't think the book would affect me this deeply, and I don't think I thought that the book would touch on things in such an interesting way as well. But yeah, I thought this was a phenomenal book. Whether it's a novel or non-fiction, I kind of don't care. I think this is a brilliant piece of writing. So those are the books that I've been reading this week. Take care and speak to you all soon. I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.